Hello, everyone. It's Doug Rogers. It's November 9th.
This is Russell Rogers. We're the Rogers team with Keller Williams Southlake. Let's talk DFW real estate. So we're going to start off and say Happy Veterans Day to all veterans out there. I think veterans are near and dear to our hearts. We have a lot of family members, grandparents, cousins, etc., friends, obviously, acquaintances, and I was in the military as well. For those of you that don't know, don't let the beard throw you. I was in the Air Force, at least that's what they tell me. So we're going to talk about the VA home buying process for both buyers and sellers, because I think sellers get this wrong a lot. And so we're going to talk about selling and how that kind of functions. And then also I'll give you some good advice on VA buying here at the end. So, Doug, why do sellers hate VA buyers?
Well, I think it's kind of like an old wives' tale. It's we're afraid of VA buyers when we shouldn't be. First of all, let's really ask the question: why are they afraid? Well, it's 100% loan. It's a government loan. It's difficult to get. Well, it really isn't. And there's a mistaken thought that the loan is tougher, and it is not tougher. It is actually somewhat easier to obtain. But on the realistic side, there's minimum property requirements written into the appraisal. They call them MPRs. And here's some examples. If your home is built prior to 1978 and it has any chipping or peeling paint, the VA will want it repainted. If it's built before really nice wiring, which is back in the 60s and 50s where you had aluminum wiring, they're going to want to make sure that the wiring is updated. They don't like to have, as an example, a ventless fireplace. If you have gas logs and there's no vent for the logs, for the gas, they're not happy about that. They don't like to see foundation movement or any drainage issues. If they're visible, they'll make you correct those things. They want to identify that there is some life left in the roof. So if you've got a 25-year-old roof and it's a 30-year roof and it's looking a little dodgy and it's never been replaced, then you might have a problem selling your house VA. But in our marketplace, where we live and work, everything has a new roof every 5 to 10 years because of the hailstorms. And the average marketplace, let's say in the Alliance Corridor or Frisco, Plano, the average home age is only 8 to 10 years old. There's so many new houses, and Flower Mound, Capel, Highland Village going up that direction. Vast majority of those homes were built in the last 25 years, so they're not going to have lead-based paint. They're not going to have, you know, aging problems. So there's really no reason to be afraid of the VA loan. But here's the kicker. This is what we did the research on, and we're going to prove something to you with the numbers. In the Alliance Corridor, the average VA sale in the last 30 days was 415,000. So of those 18 homes that sold in the last 30 days, they averaged 415,000. The 79 conventional loan sales in the same location using the same criteria sold for 406. That's less. The VA buyers actually were paying the same amount or more. So I thought, well, that's an anomaly. Maybe that doesn't work. Well, I took the entire county of Denton and used your typical house, and it averaged on the conventional side 565,000. Now it's higher up there because when you take the entire county, you've got homes that are in golf communities and there's $1 million lake properties, so you're going to have a higher average up there. The average VA sale was 543. It's almost the same. Now here's something that's really entertaining. The cash buyer. Oh, we'd rather have a cash buyer because it's going to be easier. Well, guess what? The cash buyer paid 543, the exact same amount that the VA buyer paid. So when you consider that we have newer homes, if your home's in great condition, you don't have foundation problems, you got a relatively new roof, you got relatively good wiring, and you don't have peeling paint, there's no reason not to consider a VA buyer. So, Russell, what do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think, honestly, I think it's because realtors don't know anything about VA buyers or the VA buying process. And so they get scared. And so just to protect themselves and not, instead of doing the research, they just, say, hey, just don't sell a VA, right? And I have had situations where I told sellers don't take a particular VA buyer's offer because of their particulars, which usually it's because they're 0% down. People think they can just buy a house very easily, and I'll have a story for that later. But basically, they needed seller concessions of about 6,000 to close. Like if they didn't get all of that, they could not financially close. And so if that's the situation, that's not the VA buyer we're talking about. That actually is kind of like a red flag. Unless you're really desperate, you got to kind of go into that very carefully. And if you have other offers that are the same amount or higher, they're probably the lowest on the totem pole at that point, just because of their financials. But if you have someone like me who's coming in and can cover all the costs, and if the appraisal doesn't come in I'm fine, then that's a whole other side of it. And so to deny someone like me just because I'm using VA and not coming in with 0% down payment is very foolish. So it is interesting that the numbers prove out that way because to your point, with all the Lockheed Martin employees here, all the government agencies that are located in the area, and all the just veterans in this area altogether, just carving out any section of a population is a terrible idea. And I think it's because of realtor laziness, to be honest. And then to your earlier point, if you're selling and you're in these older areas, like maybe in North Richland Hills built in the 50s, and you've got old wiring or foundation or lead-based paint issues going on, that might be one where you take a second thought and you really think about what your specifics are and then go from there, because that can be one you can get in trouble, but it's also worth the conversation. And then on the flip side, the buyer's agent should be thinking all this as well. So when I go look at houses, I bring up these same topics, and the wood rot is the big one, and then termite situations as well. Not that we can always see those, but if there's some kind of weird situation going on with that, those are kind of the big ones that I normally see. Have you seen any in particular that you can think of?
Well, the only one was a foundation issue that came up in Carrollton back in the 90s. And this is something we learned just through experience, that they will let you buy a house that's had foundation repair, but it has to have an engineer's report that says the following items need to be done. Let's just say 13 piers and a drainage system and a root barrier. Well, the repair better be exactly as the engineer instructed it to be, or VA won't approve it. They're going to want it to be done exactly as the recommendation is stated.
Yeah, and what I've thought was successful is when you're going into the whole process, taking a minute to discuss with the other side, whether you're the seller or the buyer, about the situation, about how we're going to have to be collaborative if a required repair does come up, and then being prepared when the appraiser gets there. I've done this with an FHA, which is a little different, but similar concept, where I actually left the pier map of what all the foundation work was done on the kitchen counter with some comps as well, kind of showing why I thought the house was worth what it was. And I left it there for them, and I know they looked at it because they took it. So, giving that information up front to the appraiser so that they do their due diligence or have it available so they don't have to work that hard for it, and then they have our information, they know we thought about it. I think that goes a long way, and then being collaborative with the other side.
Well, to make a long story short, if your house is in great shape, you have no drainage problems, you're going to having no problem selling your house to a veteran. If your house is rough around the edges, then we need to have a conversation. And we just want to make sure that we don't get into a transaction that 6 weeks in, we're putting it back on the market and trying something else.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the benefits of buying VA, and I think I can give some anecdotal evidence on this. And so obviously if you're a veteran, you're going to know about VA loans, or hopefully you find out through the process at some point. If you're working with us, you'll know about them. But there really are some serious benefits. And the biggest one obviously is the 0% down, which can be very helpful. Now with the higher rate environment we have right now, it's going to make your payment quite a bit higher than what putting 20% down might be, but it still gets you into the house a lot cheaper than putting 20% down, at least cash in your pocket. It's just going to be the same sales price essentially, but cash in your pocket is going to be a lot more. And so I was actually thinking back to the first house that I bought, and kind of a funny story that you were my realtor for that. For people that don't know, I wasn't a realtor at the time. And so it was funny because it came up in conversation that you were concerned about our appraisal not going through, not because of any repairs like we were talking about, but because, we don't talk about our finances between the two of us. And so you were worried if it didn't appraise, I might not be able to close on this house. But in the meantime, Nori and I were kind of a funny thought, because we had about $60K in the bank even after kind of paying the earnest money and everything. So we were fine. Even if it didn't appraise, it wouldn't have been that much lower because it's only 175. So it was no matter what, we were going to close on this house. And so, that kind of gives you an example of a good buyer that's coming in and going to close no matter what. But it was a huge benefit for us because the rent of the house was actually lower than what our apartment was going to be. And so we bought a house, which is now appreciated about 170K since then. And we've been renting it out, which is kind of a different story. But basically that VA loan, we got into it for $8,500, which the $8,500 I saved by using my BAH from my entitlement from the GI Bill, for what y'all would know it as. So I basically was going to school, receiving payments for through my GI Bill, and then bought a house with it. So there's kind of a comboing effect. And if you are a veteran and you haven't really thought of this, but you can basically build kind of a real estate portfolio or just get into your first house using these VA loans, and they can be extremely advantageous financially and keep a lot of money in your pocket to do other things with as well.
Yep. All right, I'm going to give you a quick update on the listings over the marketplace. And we've had some interesting changes, and we really feel as though it's due to our half-point drop in the interest rates last week, because the big number is the Alliance Corridor. They added 35 listings last week. That's down 11, but they sold an additional 21, and so the listing inventory has actually dropped to 428, where the week before it was much higher. Frisco was looking better, 674 total listings out there. They added 76, which is down 13 this week. Flower Mound, Cabell added 18 listings. Their total listing inventory is down another 9. That's looking good for us. And then Grapevine, Colleyville added 15 listings, and they're down 13 in total volume. So there's 318 out there. So all 4 marketplaces we follow actually reduced their listing inventory sign. And I feel as though that's the first time that's happened in several weeks. And it has to be because we dropped a half point from almost 8 down to 7.3.
Yeah, and to give you the updated numbers on those too. So for the 30-year conventional, it's down to 7.55, but it was kind of lower during the week. So when those offers and those sales were happening, it was lower. And then the 30-year VA, since it's Veterans Day and everything, was 6.72, and then the 30-year FHA was 6.89. So people are getting back down in those sixes for those kind of government-related loans. And then, yeah, to your point, 7.5 for the conventional, and we've both seen quite a bit more of activity since then.
Well, thank y'all for listening in this week. Please subscribe, and we'll talk to you next week.